At 6 o'clock in the evening on April 27, 2011, the residents of Rainsville, Alabama, thought dinner would go on as usual. Kids were playing on porches, pickup trucks sat parked outside modest homes, the smell of fried chicken drifted through screen doors. Except, it didn't stay that way. What you're about to hear is the story of one of the strongest tornadoes ever recorded in American history. A storm that carved a half-mile wide scar across a small town in minutes. And almost no one remembers its name. This is Rainsville. This is the tornado you've never heard of. Rainsville sits atop Sand Mountain, part of the Cumberland Plateau in northeast Alabama. Population back then, just over 5,000 people. A quiet place, the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, where Friday night football matters, where church on Sunday is a given. It's the kind of place where people wave at strangers and leave their doors unlocked. Until April 27, 2011, Rainsville was just normal, unremarkable, safe. But that day, nothing was normal. Earlier that afternoon, a supercell thunderstorm formed near Harperville, Mississippi. By evening, it had exploded into one of the most dangerous weather days in United States history. The 2011 Super Outbreak, they called it later. 368 tornadoes. The largest tornado outbreak ever recorded. Entire towns wiped off the map. And Rainsville was about to face one of the worst. But here's the thing, here's what makes this story so haunting. Most people have never even heard of the Rainsville tornado. Tuscaloosa? Yes. Joplin, Missouri? Absolutely. Hackleburg, Alabama? Maybe. But Rainsville. It drifted under the radar, forgotten in the chaos of that catastrophic day. 25 people lost their lives in this tornado's path. Dozens more injured. Entire neighborhoods erased. And yet, the story remains largely untold. So why? Why has this tornado, one of only 4 EF5 tornadoes that day, been almost invisible in the national memory? We'll answer that question. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to the moment when the sky turned dark, when the air grew still, when the people of Rainsville had no idea what was coming. By late afternoon, on April 27th, forecasters were sounding alarms. The ingredients were perfect for disaster. Gulf moisture streaming north, high wind shear tearing through the atmosphere. An unstable air mass ready to explode. Meteorologists knew. They knew this was going to be bad. The Storm Prediction Center had issued a high-risk outlook, the kind of forecast that makes veteran storm chasers nervous. Over 2,500 joules per kilogram of CAPE, convective available potential energy, the fuel for thunderstorms. Wind shear exceeding 500 meters squared per second. A surface low pressure system bottoming out at 995 millibars. In short, one of the worst setups ever recorded. But here's the cruel irony. Even with all that warning, even with all that technology, even with sirens blaring and meteorologists shouting from television screens, nothing could prepare the people of Rainsville for what was about to hit them. At 6:19 p.m., Central Daylight Time, the tornado touched down near Lakeview, a small community northeast of Geraldine, Alabama. At first, the damage looked moderate. Trees snapped, small buildings damaged, the path width only about 50 yards. Residents who saw it thought, okay, that's bad, but it's moving away. They thought the worst was over. They were wrong. As the tornado moved northeast, it began to grow, and grow, and grow. The funnel widened, the winds intensified, the forward speed increased. By the time it reached Fife, the tornado was already in the EF3 category, maybe even EF4. Trees weren't just snapped, they were sheared off at the base, ripped from the ground, debarked, twisted into unrecognizable shapes. The sound, survivors said later, the sound was like nothing they'd ever heard. Not a train, not a freight train like people always say. It was deeper than that, more guttural, more alive. It was the sound of the earth being torn apart, and it was heading straight for Rainsville. Let me introduce you to a family. We'll call them the Johnsons, though that's not their real name. They lived on the outskirts of Rainsville, a modest brick house with a basement, a safe room they had built just a few years earlier, after the tornado scares of 2008. They thought they were prepared. They thought they'd done everything right. At 6:30 p.m., they were in the kitchen. Dinner was almost ready. The kids were arguing over the TV remote. The father, let's call him David, was checking his phone, scrolling through weather alerts. The mother, let's call him Sarah, was stirring a pot on the stove. Normal, mundane, safe. Then the lights flickered. David looked up. "Did you see that?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "Storm's getting close." The television cut to the local news. A meteorologist, voice tight with urgency, was pointing at a radar screen. "If you are in northern DeKalb County, you need to take cover now. This is a life-threatening situation. This is not a drill." David's phone buzzed. Tornado warning. Then another buzz. Tornado emergency. "Kids!" Sarah shouted. "Basement! Now!" They didn't argue. They'd practiced this. Down the stairs, into the safe room, a reinforced concrete box in the corner of the basement. David pulled the heavy steel door shut, the latch clicking into place. Inside, it was dark, cramped, the air thick with fear. The kids were crying. Sarah was praying. David was listening to the sound outside. At first it was just wind, then rain, hammering against the house like bullets. Then, silence. A strange, oppressive silence that made David's ears pop. And then, the roar. It started low, a rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then it grew, louder, louder, until it was all-consuming. A sound so intense it felt like it was inside his skull. The house began to shake. Not just shake, vibrate, like a tuning fork struck by a hammer. The walls hissed, the floor buckled, the door to the safe room rattled in its frame. Sarah screamed. The kids screamed. David held them tight, and prayed. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. David waited. 10 seconds, 20, 30. He reached for the door handle, pushed, and it wouldn't budge. He pushed harder. Nothing. He threw his shoulder against it, once, twice, 3 times, and finally, it gave way. He stepped out into the basement. The stairs were gone. Just gone. Where the staircase had been, there was now open sky. He looked up, and his breath caught in his throat. The house was gone. Not damaged, not destroyed. Gone. The walls, the roof, the kitchen where they'd been standing just minutes before. All of it erased. All that remained was the foundation, the basement, and the safe room that had saved their lives. David climbed up through the rubble, pulled himself onto the slab, and looked around. The neighborhood, his neighborhood, the place where his kids had ridden bikes and played tag and grown up. It was gone. Every house, every tree, every mailbox, every car, gone. Flattened, obliterated. The ground was scoured, stripped bare, nothing left but dirt and debris and the twisted remains of lives that had been. He turned back to the basement, to his family huddled in the safe room, and he said, his voice barely a whisper, "We're alive. We're alive." But 25 other people in Rainsville and the surrounding communities, they weren't. Let's talk about the tornado itself. Let's talk about the monster that did this. By the time the tornado entered the Rainsville area, it had reached its peak intensity. The path width expanded to 3/4 of a mile. 3/4 of a mile. That's not a tornado. That's a wall of destruction, a moving apocalypse. The winds, later estimated at over 200 miles per hour, were strong enough to peel asphalt from roads, to strip bark from trees, to lift vehicles and hurl them hundreds of yards. This wasn't just wind. This was a force of nature that defied comprehension. Engineers who surveyed the damage later found homes that had been completely removed from their foundations. Not collapsed, removed. The concrete slabs were swept clean, polished almost, as if a giant hand had reached down and wiped them away. Cars were found wrapped around trees, school buses mangled down to their frames, metal rods bent into impossible shapes. One survivor described finding a piece of straw, just a single piece of straw, embedded in a wooden telephone pole. The force required to do that? Unimaginable. And the tornado was fast. Forward speed estimated at 60 to 70 miles per hour. Most tornadoes move at 30, maybe 40 miles per hour. This one was racing, tearing through the landscape faster than most people could drive. If you were in its path, you had minutes, maybe seconds, to react. And if you didn't have a safe room, if you didn't have a basement, if you were in a mobile home or an older house, your chances were slim. The tornado carved a path roughly parallel to State Route 75, moving from Lakeview through Fife, through Shiloh, through Rainsville, through Sylvania, and finally lifting near the Georgia state line. Total path length in DeKalb County alone, 33.66 miles. 33 miles of devastation. 33 miles of lives changed forever. And here's the thing that still haunts meteorologists and engineers who studied this tornado. The damage was consistent. This wasn't a tornado that touched down, lifted, touched down again. This was a continuous path of EF4 and EF5 damage for miles. The tornado maintained its intensity, maintained its width, maintained its fury for over half an hour. That's rare. That's terrifyingly rare. In June of 2011, after extensive surveys, the National Weather Service officially upgraded the tornado's rating from EF4 to EF5. EF5, the highest category on the enhanced Fujita scale. Winds over 200 miles per hour. Incredible damage. Total destruction. Alabama now holds the record for the most EF5 tornadoes in a single outbreak. 4 of them. 4. And Rainsville was one of them. But here's the question that gnaws at anyone who learns this story. If this tornado was so strong, if the damage was so catastrophic, if 25 people died, why don't we know about it? Why isn't Rainsville a household name like Tuscaloosa or Joplin? The answer is simple and heartbreaking. On April 27, 2011, Rainsville wasn't the only town hit. It wasn't even the only town hit by an EF5. Hackleburg, Alabama, was struck earlier that day. Phil Campbell, Alabama, Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, Cordova, Smithville, Mississippi. The list goes on and on and on. Over 300 tornadoes in a single outbreak. The media couldn't cover them all. The national news focused on the biggest cities, the highest death tolls, the most dramatic footage. Rainsville, a small town on Sand Mountain, population 5,000, just slipped through the cracks. And that's the tragedy within the tragedy. Because the people of Rainsville, the families who lost loved ones, the survivors who lost everything, they deserve to be remembered. Their story deserves to be told. And that's why we're here. That's why you're listening. Let's go back to the moments before the tornado hit. Let's go back to the warnings, the sirens, the desperate scramble for safety. By 6:30 p.m., tornado warnings were blaring across northern Alabama. Sirens wailed in Rainsville, in Fife, in Sylvania. People were glued to their televisions, watching the radar, watching the red polygon of the tornado, warning creep closer and closer. Meteorologist James Spann, a legend in Alabama, was on the air, his voice hoarse from hours of nonstop coverage. "If you are in Rainsville, you need to be in your safe place now," he said, his words clipped, urgent. "This is a violent tornado. This is life-threatening. Please, please take cover." But here's the cruel reality of tornado warnings. They're imperfect. The polygon on the radar screen covers a wide area, and most of the time, most of the people in that polygon won't be hit. So some people, understandably, become complacent. They think, "I've heard this before. It'll miss us. It always misses us." Except this time, it didn't. Some people took cover. They went to their basements, their safe rooms, their interior bathrooms. They huddled under mattresses, clutching their children, praying, and many of them survived, but others didn't take cover. Maybe they didn't have a basement. Maybe they didn't think it would be that bad. Maybe they were in a mobile home and had nowhere to go. Mobile homes, we need to talk about mobile homes. They're death traps in tornadoes, especially violent ones. The Rainsville tornado destroyed dozens of mobile homes, and many of the 25 fatalities were people who had been sheltering in them. It's a harsh, uncomfortable truth, but it's a truth we can't ignore. The tornado didn't discriminate. It hit rich neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods. It hit brick houses and wooden houses and mobile homes. It hit churches and schools and businesses. It hit the Rainsville Civic Center, a community hub, leaving it in ruins. It hit the volunteer fire department. It hit the places where people thought they were safe. And when it was over, when the tornado finally lifted and moved on, the people who emerged from their shelters found a landscape that was unrecognizable. The town they knew, the town they loved, was gone. Rescue operations began almost immediately. Volunteer firefighters, police officers, neighbors, strangers, they all rushed in, searching through the rubble, calling out names, listening for voices. The power was out, communications were down, and the sun was setting. They worked by flashlight, by headlamp, by the glow of car headlights. They pulled people from collapsed homes, from overturned vehicles, from piles of debris. Some were alive, some were not. One rescue worker, a volunteer firefighter from a neighboring town, described the scene later. "It looked like a war zone," he said, his voice shaking. "I've never seen anything like it. Houses just gone, cars and trees, a refrigerator half a mile from where it started. And the people were in shock. They were walking around dazed, looking for their homes, looking for their families. Some of them were bleeding, some of them were crying, some of them were just silent. It was the silence that got to me, the silence. The death toll climbed slowly. 25 people, 25 lives, 25 families shattered. Some of the victims were found in their homes, or what was left of their homes. Some were found in fields, thrown by the tornado's winds. Some were never found whole. And the injuries. Dozens of people injured, some critically. Broken bones, lacerations, head trauma, internal injuries. The local hospital was overwhelmed. Ambulances from surrounding counties rushed in, ferrying the wounded to larger hospitals in Huntsville, in Chattanooga. The roads were blocked by debris, power lines down, trees across the pavement. It was chaos. But amid the chaos, there were stories of heroism. Neighbors pulling neighbors from the rubble. Strangers stopping to help. A man who used his bare hands to dig through debris to reach a trapped child. A woman who opened her home, one of the few still standing, to shelter displaced families. A church that became a makeshift triage center. Humanity, in its rawest, most beautiful form. Now, let's talk about why this tornado was so strong. Let's talk about the science, the meteorology, the perfect storm of conditions that created this monster. April 27th, 2011 was not a normal day. The atmosphere was primed for disaster. A powerful low-pressure system was moving across the southern United States, pulling warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico northward. At the same time, a strong jet stream, winds aloft moving at 80 to 100 knots, was diving south from Canada. When these two systems collided, the result was explosive. The CAPE values, the measure of instability in the atmosphere, were off the charts. Over 2,500 joules per kilogram in some areas. For context, anything over 1,500 is considered extreme. The wind shear, the change in wind speed and direction with height, was also extreme. Over 500 meters squared per second. This wind shear is what allows supercell thunderstorms to form. And supercells are the storms that produce the most violent tornadoes. And then there was the timing. The tornado hit in the evening, just before sunset. By that time, the atmosphere had been heating all day, building energy, building instability. The storms that formed in the afternoon and evening were the most intense, the most violent. The Rainsville tornado was one of them. But there's another factor, one that's often overlooked: the terrain. Rainsville sits atop Sand Mountain, a plateau that rises about 1,000 feet above the surrounding valleys. Some people believe that mountains protect you from tornadoes. They don't. In fact, the terrain can sometimes enhance tornado intensity by funneling winds, by creating localized areas of even stronger shear. The Rainsville tornado didn't weaken as it climbed Sand Mountain. If anything, it got stronger. So, you had the perfect ingredients: extreme instability, extreme wind shear, a powerful low-pressure system, and terrain that didn't hinder the tornado. The result? An EF5. One of the strongest tornadoes ever recorded. And it hit a town that most people have never heard of. In the days following April 27th, the true scale of the devastation became clear. Aerial footage showed the tornado's path carved across the landscape like a scar, a brown, barren strip cutting through green forests and farmland. From above, you could see everything: the width of the path, the completeness of the destruction, the randomness of what survived and what didn't. One house completely obliterated, the one next to it barely touched. A church reduced to rubble, a small shed 50 feet away still standing. Tornadoes are cruel in their randomness, and the Rainsville tornado was no exception. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, arrived within 48 hours. The National Weather Service sent survey teams to assess the damage and assign a rating. Insurance adjusters descended on the area, clipboards in hand, trying to quantify the unquantifiable. How do you put a price on a lifetime of memories? How do you calculate the value of a home where children grew up, where grandparents lived, where families gathered for holidays? You can't. But they tried. The initial rating was EF4, winds estimated at 170 to 190 miles per hour. Devastating, catastrophic, but not quite the highest category. But as the survey teams dug deeper, as they examined the damage more closely, they realized this was worse than they thought, much worse. They found homes that had been completely swept away, with only anchor bolts remaining in the foundation. They found ground scouring, where the tornado had literally scraped the earth clean, removing grass, topsoil, everything down to bare rock. They found vehicles that had been lofted, carried through the air, and deposited hundreds of yards away. They found debarked trees stripped so completely that they looked like telephone poles. All of these are indicators of EF5 damage, the highest category. The most violent winds on Earth. In June of 2011, the National Weather Service made it official. The Rainsville tornado was upgraded to EF5. Peak winds estimated at over 200 miles per hour, possibly as high as 210. Path length 33.66 miles. Maximum path width 0.75 miles. 3/4 of a mile. 25 fatalities. Dozens injured. Hundreds of homes destroyed. Alabama now held a grim record. 4 EF5 tornadoes in a single day. Hackleburg, Phil Campbell, Smithville in Mississippi, and Rainsville. 4 of the most violent tornadoes ever recorded, all on the same day, all within a few hundred miles of each other. It was unprecedented, it was unimaginable, and for the people of Rainsville, it was a nightmare they would never forget. Let me tell you about the aftermath, the real aftermath, the part that doesn't make the news. Because the tornado itself, as horrific as it was, lasted only minutes. The aftermath? That lasted years. In the immediate hours after the tornado, survivors were in shock. Many of them wandered through the debris, looking for anything salvageable. A photo album, a piece of jewelry, a child's toy. Anything that connected them to the life they'd had just hours before. Some found treasures. A wedding ring in the rubble. A family Bible somehow untouched, a quilt that had belonged to a grandmother. Others found nothing, just nothing. The Red Cross set up shelters in schools and churches that were still standing. Volunteers brought food, water, blankets, clothes. People who had lost everything lined up for supplies, their faces blank, their eyes hollow. Trauma does that. It shuts you down, makes you numb, because feeling everything all at once would be too much. One woman, a survivor who lost her home and her husband in the tornado, described it this way. "I felt like I was underwater," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Everything was muffled, distant, like I was watching it happen to someone else. I kept thinking, this isn't real, this can't be real, but it was. It is real, and I have to live with it every single day. The psychological toll of a disaster like this is immense. Post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, survivor's guilt. These are common among tornado survivors, especially those who lost loved ones. Children who lived through the Rainsville tornado still have nightmares. Adults flinch at the sound of thunder. Some people can't even look at the sky without feeling panic rising in their chests. The physical scars heal, eventually. The emotional scars, those last a lifetime. But amid the trauma, there was also resilience. There was strength. The people of Rainsville didn't give up. They didn't abandon their town. They rebuilt. Rebuilding after a disaster like this is not quick, and it's not easy. It takes money, resources, time, and an incredible amount of determination. Insurance helps, but it doesn't cover everything. FEMA provides assistance, but there's red tape, delays, bureaucracy. Many families had to live in temporary housing for months, even years, while they waited for their homes to be rebuilt. The Rainsville Civic Center, a hub of community life, was heavily damaged. It took years to repair. The volunteer fire department had to operate out of temporary structures. Schools were damaged, businesses destroyed, churches reduced to rubble. The economic impact was staggering. Jobs were lost, businesses closed, families moved away because they couldn't afford to stay. But the community rallied. Volunteers from across the state, across the country, came to help. Church groups, relief organizations, individuals who just wanted to do something. They cleared debris, they rebuilt homes, they provided meals, they offered shoulders to cry on. The outpouring of support was overwhelming, and for many survivors, it was the only thing that kept them going. One man, a contractor from Huntsville, took time off work to help rebuild homes in Rainsville. He didn't know anyone there. He had no personal connection to the town, but he felt called to help. "I saw the footage on the news," he said, "and I couldn't sit at home and do nothing. These people needed help, and I had the skills to help them. So I went." He spent 3 months in Rainsville, working 12-hour days, rebuilding homes for families who had lost everything. He didn't ask for payment. He just helped. Stories like that, stories of compassion and generosity and selflessness, they're the silver lining in this tragedy. They remind us that even in the darkest moments, humanity can shine through. Now, let's address the question that's been hanging over this entire story. Why is the Rainsville tornado so unknown? Why, when it was one of the strongest tornadoes in U.S. history, when it killed 25 people, when it destroyed an entire town, why don't more people know about it? The answer is both simple and heartbreaking. April 27, 2011 was a day of overwhelming disaster. The 2011 Super Outbreak produced 368 confirmed tornadoes over 3 days, with the vast majority occurring on April 27th. It was the largest, most violent tornado outbreak in recorded history. The death toll across multiple states exceeded 300 people. The damage was in the billions of dollars. The media, understandably, couldn't cover every tornado. They focused on the ones that hit larger cities, the ones with the highest death tolls, the ones with the most dramatic footage. Tuscaloosa, a college town, home to the University of Alabama, was hit by an EF5 tornado that killed 64 people. The footage of that tornado, a massive wedge tearing through the city in broad daylight, was broadcast around the world. Joplin, Missouri, hit by an EF5 on May 22nd, just weeks later, killed 161 people and became one of the deadliest tornadoes in U.S. history. Rainsville, by comparison, was small. Population 5,000. 25 deaths, while tragic, was a lower toll than other tornadoes that day. And because the tornado hit in the evening, just before sunset, there was less footage, less dramatic video to show on the news. It was overshadowed, buried under the sheer volume of disasters happening simultaneously. But here's what we need to understand. Just because a disaster isn't covered by the national media doesn't mean it's any less significant to the people who lived through it. The families who lost loved ones in Rainsville, they don't care that Tuscaloosa got more coverage. Their pain is just as real, their loss just as profound. And their story deserves to be told. That's why we're here. That's why this matters. Because every life lost, every family shattered, every community destroyed, they all matter, not just the ones that make the headlines. Let's talk about the lessons. Because if we don't learn from disasters like this, if we don't take the knowledge and use it to save lives in the future, then what's the point? The Rainsville tornado taught us several critical lessons. Lessons that are still relevant today. Lessons that could save your life if you ever find yourself in the path of a tornado. Lesson number 1, Safe rooms save lives. The Johnson family, the family we talked about earlier, they survived because they had a safe room, a reinforced concrete box in their basement, built to withstand EF5 winds. Their house was completely destroyed, wiped off the foundation, but that safe room held. And because it held, they lived. Not everyone in Rainsville had a safe room. Not everyone had a basement. And many of those people didn't survive. The contrast is stark, and it's undeniable. If you live in tornado-prone areas, if you live in the South, the Midwest, anywhere tornadoes are a threat, you need a safe room. Not a closet, not a bathroom, a safe room. FEMA offers grants to help low-income families build them. Many states offer rebates or tax incentives. It's an investment, yes, but it's an investment in your life. Lesson number 2, mobile homes are death traps. I said it before, and I'll say it again. Mobile homes cannot withstand violent tornadoes. They just can't. Many of the fatalities in Rainsville were people who were sheltering in mobile homes. When an EF5 tornado hits a mobile home, the home disintegrates. It's torn apart, and the people inside are thrown, often with fatal results. If you live in a mobile home and a tornado warning is issued, you need to leave. Go to a community shelter. Go to a neighbor's basement. Go to a sturdy building. Do not stay in the mobile home. I know it's your home. I know it's where you feel safe, but in a tornado, it is not safe. Please, please, if you take nothing else from this story, take that. Lesson number 3. Warnings are imperfect, but they're all we have. The people of Rainsville had warning. Tornado warnings were issued, sirens were sounded, meteorologists were on the air urging people to take cover. But warnings cover large areas, and most of the time, most people in the warned area won't be hit. This creates complacency. People think, it won't hit me, it never hits me, but sometimes it does hit you, and when it does, you need to be ready. Don't ignore warnings, don't assume you'll be fine. Take them seriously, every time, because the one time you don't, the one time you think it'll miss us, that could be the time it doesn't. Lesson number 4. Community matters. In the aftermath of the Rainsville tornado, it was the community that made the difference. Neighbors helping neighbors, volunteers coming from across the state, people opening their homes and their hearts to strangers. That sense of community, that willingness to help, that's what gets people through disasters. We live in an increasingly isolated world. We don't know our neighbors, we don't talk to the people on our street. We're glued to our screens instead of connecting with the people around us. But when disaster strikes, when everything falls apart, it's the people around you who will help you survive. Build those connections now. Know your neighbors. Be part of your community. Because you never know when you'll need them. Let's talk about the science one more time, because understanding why this tornado was so strong helps us understand the risk we all face. Tornadoes are rated on the enhanced Fujita scale, which ranges from EF0 to EF5. The scale is based on damage, not wind speed, because we can't measure wind speed inside a tornado directly. We estimate it based on what the tornado destroys. EF0 and EF1 tornadoes are relatively weak. They damage roofs, break windows, snap small trees. EF2 and EF3 tornadoes are stronger. They can destroy mobile homes, damage well-built houses, uproot large trees. EF4 tornadoes are devastating. They can level well-built homes, throw vehicles, cause massive destruction. And then there's EF5, the highest category, the most violent, winds over 200 miles per hour. Incredible damage. Well-built homes swept completely away. Vehicles thrown hundreds of yards, ground scouring, total, complete destruction. EF5 tornadoes are rare. Since the enhanced Fujita scale was implemented in 2007, there have been only a handful of EF5 tornadoes in the United States. The Rainsville tornado was one of them, and the fact that 4 EF5 tornadoes occurred on the same day, April 27, 2011, is almost unbelievable. It's a testament to just how extreme the atmospheric conditions were that day. But here's the thing that keeps meteorologists up at night. It could happen again. The conditions that produced the 2011 Super Outbreak, they weren't unique. They weren't a once-in-a-lifetime event. Climate scientists warn that As the climate changes, as the atmosphere warms, the conditions that produce violent tornadoes could become more common, not less. We don't know for sure. Tornado science is still evolving, and there's a lot we don't understand. But the possibility is there, and it's terrifying. Another outbreak like 2011 could happen next year, next month, tomorrow. And when it does, will we be ready? Let me take you back to Rainsville today. It's been over a decade since the tornado. The town has rebuilt, slowly, painfully, but it has rebuilt. New homes stand where old ones were destroyed. The Rainsville Civic Center has been repaired. Businesses have reopened. Life, in many ways, has returned to normal. But the scars remain. If you drive through Rainsville, if you know where to look, you can still see them. Forests where the trees are younger, smaller, because the old ones were ripped away. Foundations where homes once stood, now empty, overgrown with weeds. Memorials, small plaques and crosses, marking the spots where lives were lost. And the people, the survivors, they carry scars too. Scars you can't see. Every spring, when the weather turns severe, when the sky darkens and the sirens sound, they remember. They remember the roar, the shaking, the terror. They remember the loved ones they lost, the homes they lost, the life they lost. One survivor, a woman who lost her sister in the tornado, put it this way. "You never really move on," she said, tears streaming down her face. You learn to live with it. You learn to carry the weight. Some days are easier than others, but it's always there, always in the back of your mind. And every time I hear thunder, every time the sky turns green, I'm back there. I'm back in that moment, and I'm terrified all over again. That's the reality of surviving a disaster like this. The physical rebuilding is hard, but the emotional rebuilding, that's even harder. And for some people, it never really ends. But there's also hope. There's strength. The people of Rainsville didn't let the tornado define them. They didn't let it break them. They rebuilt, they persevered, they survived. And in that survival, there's a powerful message. Every year on April 27th, the community gathers to remember. They hold a memorial service at the DeKalb County Courthouse, where the names of the 25 victims are read aloud. Families lay flowers, light candles, share stories. It's a somber occasion, but it's also a celebration of resilience, of community, of the human spirit's refusal to be defeated. One of the organizers of the memorial, a man who lost his home, but not his family, said this: "We remember because we have to. We remember because those 25 people deserve to be remembered. But we also remember because it reminds us of what we survived, of what we overcame. We're still here. Rainsville is still here. And as long as we're here, as long as we remember, they're not forgotten." That's the power of memory. That's the power of storytelling. By telling the story of the Rainsville tornado, by sharing the experiences of the survivors, by honoring the lives lost, we ensure that this disaster, this tragedy, is not forgotten. We ensure that the lessons learned are passed on. We ensure that the next time a tornado threatens a community, people will remember Rainsville, and they'll take cover, and they'll survive. So, what does the future hold? What can we do to prevent another Rainsville, another tragedy like this? The truth is, we can't prevent tornadoes. We can't stop them from forming. We can't steer them away from populated areas. We can't make them disappear. Tornadoes are a force of nature, and nature is more powerful than we are. But what we can do is prepare. We can build better, we can warn better, we can educate better. Building codes in tornado-prone areas need to be stronger. Homes need to be built to withstand higher winds, with reinforced roofs, impact-resistant windows, safe rooms. It costs more up front, yes, but it saves lives and saves money in the long run. After the 2011 outbreak, many communities updated their building codes, requiring new homes to meet higher standards. That's progress. But there's still work to be done. Warning systems need to be improved. Tornado warnings have gotten better over the years, with more lead time, more accuracy, but they're still not perfect. False alarms are common, which leads to complacency. We need to find ways to make warnings more precise, more targeted, so people know when they're really in danger. Research into tornado prediction is ongoing, and every year we learn a little more. But we're not there yet. And education, public education about tornado safety, needs to be a priority. People need to know what to do when a tornado warning is issued. They need to know where to go, how to protect themselves, what not to do. Schools need to have tornado drills, just like fire drills. Communities need to have shelters, clearly marked, easily accessible, and people need to take the threat seriously, not just when a tornado is bearing down on them, but before, when they have time to prepare. The Rainsville tornado taught us that preparation saves lives. The families who had safe rooms, who took the warning seriously, who knew what to do, they survived. The ones who didn't, many of them didn't make it. That's a harsh lesson, but it's one we can't afford to ignore. Let me ask you a question. What would you do if a tornado was heading toward your home right now? Do you have a plan? Do you have a safe place to go? Do you know where your family members are, how to reach them, where to meet if you're separated? If the answer is no, if you're not sure, then now is the time to make a plan. Not when the sirens are blaring, not when the sky is turning green, now. Sit down with your family, talk about what you would do. Identify the safest place in your home, the lowest level, an interior room, away from windows. If you don't have a basement, consider building a safe room. If you can't afford a safe room, identify a community shelter nearby. Make sure everyone knows where it is, how to get there. Put together an emergency kit. Water, non-perishable food, flashlights, batteries, a first aid kit, important documents in a waterproof container, medications, cash. Keep it in your safe place, ready to grab at a moment's notice. And most importantly, take warnings seriously. When a tornado warning is issued, when the sirens sound, don't go outside to look at the sky. Don't try to outrun the tornado in your car. Go to your safe place and stay there until the danger has passed. These steps, these simple steps, could save your life. They saved lives in Rainsville. They can save yours. As we come to the end of this story, I want to leave you with one final thought. The Rainsville tornado, as devastating as it was, as tragic as it was, is not just a story about destruction. It's a story about survival. It's a story about resilience, about community, about the human spirit's incredible ability to endure, to rebuild, to hope. The people of Rainsville faced one of the most violent tornadoes in history, and they survived. They lost homes, they lost loved ones, they lost the life they knew, but they didn't lose themselves. They came together, they supported each other, they rebuilt, and today Rainsville stands as a testament to that strength. But Rainsville is also a warning that tornadoes don't just hit big cities, they hit small towns too. A warning that even the strongest tornadoes can be forgotten if we're not careful. A warning that preparation, education, and community are the keys to survival. So remember Rainsville. Remember the 25 people who lost their lives on April 27, 2011. Remember the families who lost everything. Remember the survivors who rebuilt. Remember the lessons learned. Because the next tornado, the next disaster, it could happen anywhere. It could happen to you. And when it does, will you be ready? The Rainsville tornado was one of the strongest tornadoes you've never heard of. But now you have heard of it. Now you know the story. Now you know the lessons. And now it's up to you to take those lessons, to share them, to prepare, remember, learn, survive. This was Rainsville. This was April 27, 2011. This was the tornado that almost disappeared from history. But as long as we tell the story, as long as we remember, it will never be forgotten. And neither will the 25 souls who were lost that day. May they rest in peace, and may we honor their memory by being prepared, by being vigilant, by being ready for the next time nature reminds us of its awesome, terrible power. The sky can turn dark in an instant. The wind can rise without warning. The roar can come from nowhere. But if we're prepared, if we're educated, if we're together, we can survive. Rainsville survived, and so can you.